All right, so we're going to get started. All right, so our topic today is equanimity and the window of tolerance. So Margaret Cullen said, the essence of equanimity is the ability to care without either attachment or detachment. And I think what I'm drawn to by this statement is the fact that care is right at the beginning of it. It's almost like it's a definition which sort of protects us from making the mistake that is sometimes made where we confuse equanimity and its near enemy, indifference. As you may recall or not, the last time I spoke about equanimity, it was through the lens of this near enemy, indifference. I knew I would be revisiting it since I find that every time I change the lens through which I consider a topic, I discover another layer of its meaning. And so here we go. So when we see the word equanimity, the first idea that comes to mind, even for many who are new to the teachings, may be balance. But this is not a mathematical sense of balance with quantifiable equality on both sides of a fulcrum. This is a balance born of wisdom. It's the wisdom that comes with an understanding of the nature of things, that nothing is permanent, that we are not in control, that things happen, and the wisdom that knows that if we do not understand the wisdom of things deeply within, we will suffer with reactivity, clinging, and aversion, and probably spread it around to others. So, although this is not a talk about the Brahma Viharas, today I'd like to spend just a few moments contextualizing equanimity within them. I remember being told on an early retreat that Buddhists love lists, and it seems to be true. There are lots of lists. Because I have a pretty terrible memory for lists, I've spent a lot of time memorizing lists. And to be honest, sometimes that memorization process doesn't leave a whole lot of leftover effort and energy and time to actually think about what's on the lists. So recently I've been, for me, digging in a little deeper to the Brahma Viharas. So Brahma can be translated as supreme, divine, or just plain best. And Viharas are dwelling or abiding or a home. So the Brahma Viharas are four qualities which taken together form our best home.
Compassion,
So metta, loving kindness,
mudita, sympathetic joy,
the deep knowing of connection. Karuna, compassion. This is a profound sensitivity It's been described as the trembling or quivering of our hearts when we see the suffering of others. Mudita, sympathetic joy, taking delight in the success and good fortune of others, free from competitiveness and ego. And then we come to upekkha, equanimity, born of wisdom and the way things are. So we want to practice and experience connection, sensitivity, celebration in our interactions with ourselves and others. And it's with the deep knowing of how things are, which equanimity provides, its spaciousness, its balance, that we can do so free of reactivity, clinging, and aversion. I've really come to believe that it's this spaciousness that's key to me when it comes to equanimity. So, as Pema Chodron put it, there's enough space in your own being, enough space in the whole of creation to accommodate all of it. It's because we pick and choose, because we have biases and prejudices, because we prefer smooth to rough and then react for and against that we suffer. So, thinking about equanimity at this time, it seemed to me that one of our greatest challenges is maintaining balance amidst great uncertainty while remaining engaged with what's happening. It's often said that Buddha's teachings are proof that even in the Buddha's time, these same challenges were present and that these are human conditions. And I agree that the ingredients that were there fueling suffering were the same then as they are now. But to stick with a somewhat fragile food metaphor, I think the tools in our kitchen have radically and significantly changed, which create greater challenges. Because of the abundance of information made available to us due to technological advances and innovations, information which would have reached us in a narrow stream, we now swim in. It surrounds us 360 degrees and it's at our fingertips 24/7. And many of us do struggle with heightened intensity, trying to maintain wisdom and compassion and balance in that same old, ever changing world, but with moment to moment awareness of the modern complexities of those changes. The situation is not hopeless. On the contrary, the hope offered by the teachings is as real as ever, and cultivating equanimity is key to what we need at this time. So let's revisit the cause of this balancing act that we're engaged with as humans. According to the Buddha, there are 8 worldly conditions in 4 pairs of opposites: gains and loss, disrepute and fame, blame and praise, and pleasure and pain. If we place these on a balance, we can see and feel the challenge to develop and maintain equanimity about these. At times, particularly if we are run down and under great stress, it may seem ludicrous to try to approach these conditions with balance. So, for help with this, I turn to a wise woman. Dolly Parton put it simply: the way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you've got to put up with the rain. So, back to our balance. For some of us, the challenge is not only on the personal level, but on the level of our self identifiers regarding gender, nationality, economic status, and others. Even if we ourselves are trying to live a humble and wholesome life with equanimity, we may experience loss, disrepute, blame, and pain according to the larger group with which we identify. For example, white people in the US and elsewhere may be struggling with these undesirable conditions in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI issues. And thinking about all of this can make some of us, and me included, start to feel contracted, which makes equanimity harder to practice. In fact, I'm feeling a little contracted at the moment. So before we move on, let's just take one moment to invite spaciousness, physical, mental, and emotional, into our experience. So let's just do a couple of breaths, just with a little bit of movement. We're going to take up a lot of space physically. We're going to notice what this feels like, and we're going to breathe in spaciousness and then settle and relax as we breathe out, seeing if we can hold on to that spaciousness. It's a bit of a challenge. So let's just inhale our arms up. We're taking lots of space. And then exhale them back down. And we'll just do one more. Inhaling up, just noticing what it feels like to take this much space. And exhaling down. Can we hold on to that feeling of spaciousness even as we continue? So Jack Cornfield put this nicely. I'm just going to give you a moment to read this. So when I first learned about the Brahma Viharas and equanimity in particular, I could see their value, and practicing equanimity was attractive and compelling to me. So, did I practice? Well, not exactly. I read. Actually, to be more accurate, I purchased many books and read some of them, admiring others from afar. I listened to lectures online, I took courses, I went down internet rabbit holes for hours. There wasn't all that much practice going on. And while this was enriching and helpful, it provided me with a strong philosophical foundation. No regrets. But a time came when I could no longer avoid the truth. Resistance was futile. Without actually practicing, I would probably not progress as I wished toward freedom from suffering. And so I practiced. It was around this time that I started to learn about the nervous system. I started to understand that what I felt as the experience of anxiety was my nervous system, its response to perceived threat. I sensed intuitively that my reactivity could be understood in terms of the nervous system as well as the teachings. So let's just look at one small aspect of the intersection of the Buddha's teachings with the nervous system. This is, I've called it Autonomic Nervous System 101, but I almost feel like maybe I should have called it Pre-K edition because I've really simplified things. In any event, um, so the autonomic nervous system is made up of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And these systems reside in the oldest part of our brain. So, evolutionarily speaking, they've been with us the longest, and they've had the most time to evolve us optimally. Now, evolve us for what? Protection and safety, survival. Okay, so these mechanisms are vital to us. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have strong parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system responses. So the sympathetic nervous system, you could think of it as the accelerator, like the gas pedal in a car. Okay, so when we need to go, our sympathetic nervous system is going to kick in. And then the parasympathetic nervous system we could think of as the brake in the car. So it's going to slow us down. Sometimes it's actually going to go to a stop. And the association we sometimes have is that the sympathetic nervous system, the go, the accelerator, can be associated with fight and flight. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, the brake, in its healthiest state is rest and digest, but it can actually land us in freeze. And that's something we'll talk about in a moment. So what's happening inside? Don't be afraid. I know it's a little sciencey looking. So what we're seeing here in purple is our internal arousal system, the stop and the go and the stop, chemically speaking, that's going on in our bodies and our brains when we need to move forward. So this could be a challenge or a threat. And by the way, our nervous system isn't great at knowing which is which. So it kind of blurs the lines between challenge and threat, which can explain a lot. So just to give you an example, our cortisol and adrenaline, when we push that accelerator, because we have something coming up that we need to attend to, and that something could be running away from something or running towards something, these are going to come into the body. They're going to be released. And that's going to cause some physiological changes as well. You know, you might be familiar with just more perspiration. Perhaps the heartbeat gets a little bit faster. Sometimes our hands and our feet get cold. The breathing is affected, becomes more shallow, more rapid. So the sympathetic nervous system is engaged at those times. Now, when the need to act passes, the parasympathetic nervous system engages. So these levels come down and we slow, we come back to a resting state. So the extremes of the sympathetic nervous system engagement is hyperarousal. And please don't worry, there will not be a test. And the extreme of the parasympathetic nervous system is hypoarousal. Okay, so big energy experiences, good or bad, are going to cause arousal. This can cause problems depending on our window of tolerance. So we're going to get to that in a moment. Now, keep in mind, big energy experiences might be a wedding that's coming up or losing one's job, but it also might be misplacing the keys. It might be having to clean up something that broke that we really cared about. So, what's the tie in with equanimity? It's the window of tolerance. So, the term the window of tolerance was coined by Dan Siegel. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's a professor of psychiatry at UCLA. And it refers to a window. So, each of us has it within which we can tolerate the variation in our arousal levels and maintain groundedness, openness, curiosity, and flexibility. That sounds an awful lot like characteristics we might associate with equanimity. So, when we exist within this window, we're able to learn effectively. We can relate well to ourselves and others. However, if we move outside our window, we can become hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused. Before we get to what that looks like, people's windows of tolerance can be different widths. What we're looking at now is what we might call a typical window of tolerance. Through most of the ups and downs in arousal, this person is maintaining groundedness, openness, curiosity, and flexibility. Some of us have a little more challenge in this regard. This is what a narrow window of tolerance might look like. As you can see, the same arousal levels are outside the window now. So, what determines the width of your window? Well, several things. Genetics play a role. We're learning more about that through epigenetic studies. And what was happening at home in the early years are key. Simply by learning from an older person in the household who has a narrow window of tolerance, we may pick up habits of reactivity, even if we weren't born with them. So we're going to take a little side trip now and just mention ACEs. Don't worry too much about the details. You can always Google ACEs at any point and get some information. But the basic idea here is there was a study done of 17,000 mostly white middle and upper middle class college educated San Diegans with good jobs and great health care. The reason that they did the study with this population is that they wanted to eliminate a whole world of yeah buts that were going to dismiss the outcomes based on other issues that were a lot more marginalized by the establishment. So all of these people belong to the Kaiser Permanente Health Maintenance Organization, and that's how they got 17,000 people in this study. So the ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the original study identified 10 ACEs, and they can be in the categories of abuse and neglect. And then there's also other sorts of experiences. And I'll just let you take a look at it for a moment. And then after that study was done, some other hospitals or research organizations have added a few more. So, for example, in Philadelphia, they've added witnessing violence, feeling discrimination, adverse negative neighborhood experiences, being bullied, or living in foster care. And the idea is that as your ACE score increases, so the number of these ACEs that you experienced before the age of 8, so does the risk of disease and social and emotional issues. So, with an ACE score of 4 or more, people tend to start to realize that their life has been impacted negatively. And there are physical associations as well. The increases of 390% for pulmonary lung disease, 240% increase in hepatitis, 460% increase in depression, and other, suicide rates are higher. So it's good news that we understand this, and it allows us to target interventions in a really organized way. But it also really drives home the connection between these early experiences and later outcomes. Okay, so back to our window. So, as I said before, if we push the accelerator too much, we can go into hyperarousal, and that would be fight or flight. Now, when we're in fight or flight mode, this is characterized by anxiety, overwhelm, and the two-sided coin of hypervigilance. Everything has to be just so, perfectionist behavior, and chaos. Oh my gosh, nothing has any order. I can't even organize my sock drawer right now. And then there's, on the other end, hypoarousal. So it's where that brake pedal was a little too much, and we came down out of our window of tolerance and go down into freeze. So shutdown, numbness, passivity. And the reason shame is included is that often these characteristics are judged in our culture, especially. So it may be that people who are displaying shutdown, numbness, and passivity are judged as not caring, not having enough motivation, being lazy, all of those things. And this is a very short trip to shame. Okay, so just looking again at the narrow window of tolerance, we can see what a challenge this would be. So a person with a very narrow window of tolerance, perhaps because they experienced 4 or more of those ACEs, may really be challenged because they're spending a lot of their time in these places of anxiety, overwhelm, hypervigilance, and chaos, and or shutdown, numbness, passivity. So some people, as we're about to see, have different tendencies. Okay, so we're back to a little bit of a wider window now. Some people have a tendency to fight and flight. So that's where they tend to go, and they really may never experience this shutdown mode. Some people have the opposite tendency. They wish they had a little more of that fight or flight. They really spend a lot of time in the shutdown place. And our tendencies, again, they can be genetically based, they can be based on early experience, learning from what's modeled for them as kids. There can be a lot of things that influence that. Okay, so let's bring this back to the language of equanimity. So if within the window we meet life's events and challenges with groundedness, openness, curiosity, and flexibility, it means that we are meeting these challenges and life events with balance. It means that we are able to see that life has its ups and its downs. We're grounded in this understanding. We're open and spacious, right? We can handle it when life sends us a curveball. It's okay, we're open. We can incorporate that curveball into what we're going to do, what our response is going to be. We're flexible. That's part of the openness and the spaciousness. We can make an adjustment. And we're curious, the mindfulness piece. We notice, what's happening here? Okay, so this visualization might seem a little aspirational, but what the heck? The monks who have practiced 10,000 hours plus, who are flown all over the world to neuroscience labs and hooked up to fMRI machines because they have such ability to control their thought processes, they experience neither hyperarousal nor hypoarousal, except in very extreme circumstances. Almost all their experience is within the window of tolerance. So Pema Chodron said, to cultivate equanimity, we practice catching ourselves when we feel attraction or aversion before it hardens into grasping or negativity. It is much more likely that we will be able to do this if we are working within our window of tolerance. And the good news is that the window of tolerance can be widened. We are not stuck with what we got. So the window of tolerance can be widened by mindfulness activities. Every time that we practice, whether we're meditating or doing mindful movement or off the cushion in our day to day lives, having a habit and a practice of being aware of what's happening while it's happening, we are maintaining or widening our window of tolerance. Okay, so we'll just move on to a few sort of concrete ideas and suggestions. One is to simply make adjustments to your meditation practice so that you do it more often and for longer time. Meditation is win win. You will experience wisdom from the silenced mind, and at the same time, you will widen your window of tolerance so that you spend less and less time in hyper or hypo arousal, fight, flight, and freeze. Include movement in your meditation routine, not just on Saturday mornings at MMI. If it's good on Saturday, it's good the rest of the week too. So, studies show that when we coordinate movement, breath, and awareness, we keep the prefrontal cortex engaged and we are less likely to be reactive. Throughout the day, look for opportunities to practice any of the Brahma Viharas, even for a moment, focusing on what is relevant to the present situation. Is there a need for connection? Metta. Are you having the opportunity to acknowledge the suffering of others? Karuna. Are you feeling competitiveness arising? Mudita. And are you feeling a need for balance? Upekkha. And finally, try to balance, no pun intended, your cognitive understanding of equanimity with the physiological experience of what hyper and hypoarousal feel like in the body. In T.S. Eliot's poem, Ash Wednesday, he says, "Teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still." And hopefully we still have a bit of time for some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Barrie.
You're welcome.
I'll be helping to moderate for the rest of the time that we have here. We just have a few more minutes, but I would love to just a little friendly reminder that for this short period of time that we have, if we could present questions for our speaker and to reserve any personal discussion or personal comments for the breakout room that we'll have right after the session ends. That way we can take advantage of our instructor Barrie's great knowledge and ask her any questions about what she shared today. So if anybody has any question, feel free to write down in the chat or to raise your hand and we could get started.